Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about NPC reaction pros and cons. This comes from a question from Vadim Pakutkin, who said, Tim, I was so hoping you could talk about the broader philosophy behind implementing or not implementing NPC triggers/reactions. I think that would be even more interesting than just specific implementation examples. He was asking that on a video I did on NPCs triggering each other, and I was giving a lot of examples. And this is certainly something I can talk about, and I will. But funnily enough, if I don't give a lot of examples in these videos, I frequently get comments from people saying, could you give me examples of that? Could you talk about in your game or in another game where you see something like the mechanic you're talking about? So that's why I give a lot of examples. But this is different. This is going to be the philosophy of why you would do it. Before you watch this, I recommend you watch the video that got all this started months ago called NPC Reaction. It's linked below. Or the video that Vadim was commenting on, which was NPCs triggering each other, because I'm not going to repeat the stuff that are in those videos. So go watch them. So in this one, I'm going to talk about why you would want to or not want to have NPC reactions in your game. Basically, what are the pros and cons of NPC reactions? And just one advance bias warning. Obviously, I like NPC reaction, but I think I came up with a really good list of cons for you to consider if you're making your own game and considering putting them in. So let's start with the pros. Probably the number one reason I like NPC reactions to each other and the player is, and things in the environment basically, is it makes the world feel alive. It's the one of the foundational things you need to do if you want a living world. But more than that, because I love more than just reactivity, I love replayability. Making the world react in different ways to different player character builds is not only super fun for the player, but it introduces a lot of replayability because, you make a wizard and you're always setting things on fire and they react to that, and then you decide to make yourself, a priest character and you're raising people from the dead or healing people and you want to hear that reaction. That should have more positive reaction in theory. I suppose raising people from the dead may also not have a good reaction, but that depends on the design of your game, which I will get to. A big pro of doing NPC reactions in a game is, and this is one of those designer psychology things, it strokes player ego. Player does something, wears something, finishes some quest, and people comment on it. It makes players go, I'm special, which players want to hear. There's a joke, a running joke of the trope of the player is the chosen one, and everybody makes fun of it. I make fun of it too. But at the same time, that's pure player ego stroking, and players like that. Even the players say they don't like it, they like it. Because games that do that tend to be better liked. Another thing I love about NPC reactivity is it can be a very, very cheap way of introducing reactivity. Text is super cheap. Having someone float something over their head like, whoa, you're naked, or that's a scary looking helmet, that's super cheap. Way cheaper than an animation, a cinematic, a dialogue tree where they talk about it. It's just a cheap one-off reaction that players notice, they smile, and they get on with their day. Now, if you're going to voice over your game, VO costs more, but this is where shared generic lines can help. These are lines that you can have any character say for a lot of different things a player might be doing. These are lines like, what are you doing? Stop that. Or go away, you're annoying. Those lines could be used for anything from a player loitering to trying on different items right in front of the NPC to throwing a spell or something. All of those kind of work. It basically shows the NPC's noticing what you're doing and doesn't like it. Now, code-wise, there can be a performance hit for reaction, but I'm telling you, you can be clever on how you test, and you won't have to worry about it. The high-level thing is don't test every NPC. You only have to do the ones that are fairly close to the player. Somebody across the street yelling, hey, I like that hat. You don't need to do that. And you don't have to do it every frame. You can do it on heartbeats, which I've talked about in several other videos, where a heartbeat is something that happens on a player every few seconds, and it's a way of making the NPCs not do all their checks every frame. Instead of doing it every frame, you do it every heartbeat, and heartbeats can be varied. I'll talk about that more under cons, because while NPC reaction can be cheap, if your programmers don't buy in early, it can be very expensive. So that's a good segue. Let's jump into all the cons. Reasons you don't want to put NPC reaction, or a lot of them, in your game. I'll throw out my standard disclaimer: time and money. Now, I say that for everything. I'm going to say it again here. If you want reaction lines to things the player may be doing, they need to be designed, written, coded, and tested. That is a lot of work, especially if you want the NPC interactions that I talked about in the second video. These are things where NPCs do something and other NPCs react. That's way more expensive, because now NPCs have to look at more than just the player. They have to look at all around their environment all the time. You don't want them walking halfway into a burning puddle and then going, oh no, there's fire. You want them to say that before they walk in. Testing here can get especially egregious, because if you have lots of interaction, a lot of reaction and interaction in your reaction, that's a lot of test cases for QA to go over. And I assume you're going to give them some kind of, here are all the test cases I want you to go through. I'm assuming you're going to make them a testing plan for this. That can be a really long testing plan, and a long testing plan is an expensive testing plan. In a fully voiceover game, it can get expensive to have every NPC and every creature that can talk react to everything in the game in their own voice. That means every person, every voice actor that you bring in the studio has to say all of those reaction lines to all the things the player could possibly be doing. It's one of the reasons I think VOs can be very expensive. But there's a lot more than this. Let's go away from the time and money stuff and talk about design philosophy things, which I think is what the original person was asking about. First of all, if NPC reactions are too frequent or interrupt the player, that can be very annoying. That's why I usually do NPC reactions as a bark. You walk by and they're like, you're nude. They grab you and force you into conversation and go, you're nude. That's not cool. Also, if every time you go into a shopkeeper and you happen to be wearing the scary armor, and they're like, oh God, your armor is so scary, why are you wearing that? And you have to go through a dialogue before you can just go, I wish to shop now. That can be annoying. Basically, if the reactions get in the way of the player wanting to do what they want to do. Similarly, but separately, if those reactions are too repetitive or too robotic, basically anything that makes the player see the underlying reaction code too easily, then paradoxically, that will make your world feel less alive. The whole point of doing NPC reactions is to make a living world. But if it's very robotic, if they're like, look at your armor, that's funny armor, and it's generic, and they say it all the time, you're walking down the street and everybody you're passing like, funny armor, funny armor, funny armor, it will feel robotic and the player won't like it. One caveat, I talked about NPCs reacting to other NPCs. If there's too much NPC on NPC reaction, that makes some players feel less special. I mentioned, players that we joke about the chosen one, but there's a lot of players out there, they want to be the center of the world. They want to be the hero or the villain. They want to be what everybody's paying attention to. And if NPCs spend a lot of their time paying attention to each other and not the player, that will make some players feel less special. Furthermore, if when you're designing NPC reaction, you don't cover everything, that's going to cause issues. Basically, if a reaction is expected from an NPC and it's missing, that will feel wrong. It's an example of you can't just do it halfway. You have to do it completely. If you have 4 really cool sets of armor in the game that look very distinctively unusual, and NPCs react to 3 of them, but not the 4th, players will notice and they won't like it. And it would be worse than if you didn't react to any of them. Reacting to none of them, okay, they don't react to that. But 3 of the 4, suddenly you're like, wait a minute, I'm wearing this cool, necro armor or my new necro pants. Why is no one reacting to that? Similarly, if you react to what the player's wearing, but you don't react to them being naked, that can feel like a huge missing reaction. But there's a lot of other things. Let's get away from armor. Like if you go to a shopkeeper and you spend a lot of money there, I've talked about upping their reaction to you. So the next time they see you, like, oh, look, it's my favorite customer. That's cool. Maybe they even give you a discount. That's super cool. If you do some things like that, but not others, the player's like, well, why does this vendor care that I spent a lot here and this one doesn't? Or why is this shopkeeper commenting on me spending a lot of money, but this other shopkeeper not mentioning me just coming in and browsing all the time and never buying anything? So you've got to cover all the cases. And then I talked about performance earlier. You've got to get your coders to buy in on this early. If they don't, if they try to shove all this in, especially if you designed it late in the design cycle and they've already got code in there, and then you're like, I want to add 20 new things, this can cost you in performance. I've heard programmers say, what do you mean there are hundreds of reactions to check? I've talked about checking in heartbeats, so you don't have to do it every frame, which won't slow you down. You can also order the reactions from here are the most common things to check. So they will most likely trigger early in the check, and you won't be checking if there's 100 things to check and the most common ones there's 10 really common ones and you check them first, you won't have to check the other 90 because those common ones will trigger more frequently. Another way you can do it is you can set a flag that's easy to check from other code. For example, if they're in inventory and they put on that cool set of armor, just set a flag saying react to armor. And then they don't have to do a big expensive check. When you walk by an NPC, that you can see the player has the I need to react to armor flag on them. You don't have to dive into their armor and look at what they're wearing or anything, unless they have a specific reaction to it. But you don't have to do a lot of that expensive checking all the time. Similarly, if they're nude, if they take off all their clothes, set a little flag saying they're nude, and now NPCs can react to it easily. But here's probably the biggest thing you need to think about. Forget all the pros and cons I've said. Does NPC reactivity fit into your design goals? And you did make your design goals, right? When you're making your design, I told you at the very top you should have your goals for the entire game, and then every feature in your game should talk about how it works to support those goals. So are you making a game where the player is supposed to blend in and be unnoticeable, like you're a super assassin? Then maybe you don't want NPCs reacting, oh, look, it's that guy. Oh, look at that guy with the hat. You're trying to blend in. It goes counter to your game's goals. Similarly, if you're making a very serious horror game, like it's supposed to be scary and serious, having a monster go, hey, those are nice shoes, doesn't fit the tone of your game. It's not your goal. You're trying to scare the player, not make them laugh. Because of this is probably the biggest one. Do you want reactivity? What are your design goals? And that's entirely on you. Only you know that. You have design goals that are specific to your game. Look at those goals, and from those goals answer, do I need NPC reactivity or not? And that should guide your design philosophy all the time. Anyway, I hope this answers your question, Vadim Pakutkin.